How's it going, everyone? This is Daniel from the chess website, and welcome to our video on the top 7 chess openings for beginners. So this video is obviously geared towards players who are just starting out at chess. You might have a basic sense of strategy and tactics and even opening principles and things like that. We're going to be providing you with 7 reliable openings that you can use with your own games. There'll be 4 openings with white, 3 openings with black, and what I want to keep in mind is these openings will be geared towards following the opening principles. The opening principles being controlling the center, you want to develop your pieces efficiently, and obviously king safety is very important. But also the criteria that we will be meeting for these openings will be just sort of playability. We don't want you to be bogged down with a bunch of theory and very complicated positions. We want it to be relatively simple and an opening that you can enjoy playing and learning from. So with that said, let's get to it. So we will start with the white openings, and the first 2 openings actually derive from the moves e4, e5. So we put our e pawn out. We're controlling the center, we're letting our bishop and potentially our queen out. Black does the same. We play knight to f3. In one of our other suggestions, we're going to look at a different knight move on the second move, but after knight f3, knight c6. The first suggestion is called the Italian. The Italian is probably the most popular opening suggestion for beginners. It's this move bishop c4. And the Italian, that is what defines the Italian when you put the bishop on c4. If you put on b5, it's called the Spanish. If you play d4, which we'll look at here in a second, it's called the Scotch. If you play knight c3, it's 3 knights, which could transpose to 4 knights. There are many different ways to take this. So bishop c4 is the Italian. Why is the Italian so principled? Well, you're developing your bishop closest to the center possible. As you can see, you're controlling the d5 square, which is one of the 4 center squares. You also have the bishop nicely placed to potentially attack things or target things on f7. There's already a weakness that you can sort of exploit. And also, you're preparing to potentially castle next move. So after bishop to c4, there are a few options that black can play, and this isn't really a big opening theory video, this is just to get some ideas. But if black plays knight f6, you can play a move like d3 and then sort of slow play it, or you can go for a fried liver with knight g5, which there's definitely content about, so feel free to check that out. If black plays the move bishop c5, then there are many options. You could castle, you could play d3, you could play c3. Ultimately, what you'll be doing is you'll want to castle at some point, and then develop your pawns as well as your pieces. You might be putting your bishop on e3 or g5 depending on what the position calls for, maybe putting the knight on d2 and then preparing some queenside advance. There are a lot of potential plans that you can go about. And again, there are a bunch of resources as far as the opening theory goes to these openings, so feel free to check those out. The other e4, e5 opening that I would suggest with white is to play this move pawn to d4. This is called the Scotch. Now, the reason why I like the Scotch is because from the get-go, you open both of your bishops, as well as controlling the center, which is already something you should be doing anyway. So after pawn to d4, black will normally take. If black doesn't take, then they invite you to either take the pawn on e5 or push with d5. So black takes, then we take. Then the game can go several directions. Black could play bishop c5, black could play knight f6. A position like this is very common, maybe something like bishop e4, and then knight takes, bishop d3, and you just have a very pleasant position where you have the 2 bishops, you're going to castle very soon, you have a nice pawn in the center, and you are good to go. The next opening that we will be suggesting you look into from the white side is actually not developing your knight to f3, it's developing your knight to c3. Now, knight to c3 is called the Vienna game. And the reason you develop your knight to c3 rather than playing knight f3 is you keep the f-pawn on f2, with the possibility that you might play a move like f4 later in the game. Now, there are a couple of ways to approach this. Black will normally play a move like knight f6, and there are a couple of ways you can approach it. You can play bishop c4, d3, and then f4. This is more of a Vienna game. Or you could play an immediate Vienna Gambit, which is when you play f4. And if the pawn is taken, then you play e5. And now the knight is sad. So black will normally play something like d5, and then there will be takes, and then move like queen f3 is pretty common, so on and so forth. So you could play a Vienna Gambit if you want a very sharp game and good opportunities for your opponents to mess up. Or if you want to be more positional, more quiet, you could play a move like bishop c4 and play d3, f4, knight g to e2, and then just slow play it from there. The next wide opening we'll be looking at, and the last wide opening, is the very controversial London system. Now, is the London system objectively that good? I mean, it's all right. The thing about the London system, it's very easy to remember. You put your pawn out, then you play knight f3, you play bishop f4, and then you sort of make a pawn triangle with e3 and c3. You'll put your bishop on d3, knight on d2, you castle, and it's very solid. As you can see, black tries to maybe instigate some pawn tension with c5, but we don't even budge, because if they take, we can just take back with either e or c pawn. So we are good to go there. And again, as I'd say with all these openings, there are a lot of resources out there to check out as far as theory and specific plans go. This video is just sort of a guideline to these openings that we'd recommend you pursue if you're a beginner. And what I would say with black is we looked at 2 openings in response to e4 and 1 in response to d4. There are so many openings that we could have looked at, so if you have any suggestions that we might have missed, feel free to link them in the comments or write them in the comments. So against e4, I would say one opening we would suggest is to play this move e5. The upside is that just like white, you are controlling the center, you're developing your pieces or preparing to do so. And, you know, just after play like knight f3, knight c6, it can be very just sort of, you know, streamline, very, you know, symmetrical. You're following the principles, you're controlling the center, you're preparing to castle. The downside is that there could be some crazy gambits and things like that you have to be prepared for. Like already on move 2, you have to be prepared for like the King's Gambit. There might even be like some Scotch gambits you have to be prepared for. So there are some downsides to that. However, I probably would also say that if you're a beginner, you shouldn't be worried too much about opening theory. Just learn the ideas, you know, learn from your mistakes and follow the opening principles. And so maybe a safer option is the very popular Kocon Defense, which is this move c6. Now, at first sight, when you're thinking control the center, develop your pieces, castle, you might be thinking, well, what does c6 do? It doesn't really seem to do much. Sure, maybe we're getting our queen out, but what good does that do? The idea behind c6 is next move to springboard your pawn to d5. So you play pawn to d5, you're attacking the e-pawn and controlling the center, and now white has to make a decision. They could protect, they could advance, or they could take. And there are obviously more moves than just those 3 moves, but those are the main moves. And so if white protects, you can play a move like bishop f5, then start activating your pieces. If white takes, you just take back, and then you play chess. If white protects, then you can play takes, and then you could go bishop f5, or knight f6 is also a move. And then again, you just develop from there. So that is called the Kocon. The last opening that we will be suggesting is an opening against d4. It's sort of a semi-Slav. So after d4, d5, if white just plays like a London or something normal, you'll just be able to develop your pieces normally without much issue. But if white plays this very popular opening called the Queen's Gambit, then you can play sort of a semi-Slav. It doesn't really matter which pawn you start with, e6 or c6. You could go either way. The point is sort of like the London system. You're getting this pawn triangle to work with. And so Play might develop something like knight f3, knight f6, develop your bishop, castle, and in some variations you might be able to take and play b5. Although that could get pretty complicated because it would potentially surrender the center. But anyway, I think this is a very reliable way to play. What I will note is that when you do play the semi-Slav, you are locking in your bishop, and it's not very opportune. Let's say you go c6 first. It's not a very good idea to get your bishop out early in the Slav because this b7 pawn is weak, as is this sort of d5 square. So white has some very concrete variations with taking and then going queen b3. And the b7 pawn's attacked, the d5 pawn's attacked. It's suddenly sort of feeling the absence of the bishop. So yeah, those are the 7 openings that we would suggest you look at. The Italian, the Scotch, the Vienna, the London, the Kocon, e5, and the semi-Slav. All right, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Feel free to let us know what you think in the comments, and I will see you for the next video. Take care.